Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for AZM's Anti-Semitism, Anti-Zionism, and Holocaust Denial Project's first webinar. This is our big launch, and I thank you all for joining. My name is Lauri Regan, and I am proud to be chairing this new and important task force established to address the various forms of Jew hatred we see increasing today. For those who are not familiar with AZM, it is an umbrella organization comprised of 33 national Jewish Zionist organizations working across a broad ideological, political, and religious spectrum, linking the American Jewish community together in support of Israel, Zionism, and the Jewish people. AZM is the U.S. Zionist Federation and the World Zionist Organization. I am delighted to work with so many individuals and organizations that recognize the critically important work of addressing and fighting the growing trend of demonizing Jews and Israel, and openly denying the existence of the Holocaust and the systemic murder of over 6 million Jews just a relatively short time ago in our millennia-long history. Today, I am truly honored to be moderating a discussion with two distinguished and compelling men, both Holocaust survivors, who not only have stories to tell, but who have wisdom to impart and lessons to share. Both of these extraordinary men recognize how precarious the Jewish people's survival is, and they have dedicated their lives to working to ensure that we understand that history does in fact repeat itself, and that never again is simply a saying if Jews do not take an active role in their own survival. And they understand that means that we never take Israel for granted, nor should we ever take for granted that any country outside of Israel will continue to welcome us without end. Rather than me introduce our speakers, Irving Roth and Sammy Steigmann, I thought it would be better for each of them to take a few minutes to share with you some background about themselves before we proceed with our discussion. I also wanted to note that this webinar is being recorded, and you all will receive an email with the link in the coming days. Irving Roth, the director of the Holocaust Resource Center, Temple Judea of Manhasset, is an Auschwitz survivor who has authored and edited books about the Holocaust and who devotes his time educating young and old about the evils of prejudice and anti-Semitism. Irving, would you please share with everyone a bit about your story?
As you pointed out, I'm a survivor of Auschwitz and Buchenwald. I was born and lived in Czechoslovakia, which itself was a democracy. And I think it's important to understand as we begin speaking about what led up to the Holocaust and how people reacted to it, to understand that Czechoslovakia was somewhat of a good copy of what American society was all about. The issue of freedom, opportunity for all. And that's my background. I came to the United States in 1947. As Korean War starts, I'm wind up in the US Army. After that, I get an education, the bachelor's and master's in engineering, where I spent about 40 years working primarily on government contracts, much of it in defense in the defense industry. Since 1994, I've been working on nothing else except Holocaust education, because I find it to be extremely important that people understand how we got there, what happened, and what we need to do today.
Thank you. Thank you, Irving. I look forward to talking with you more in the next hour. Sammy Steigmann, who spent several years in a labor camp and was the subject of Nazi medical experiments that left him with no memory of that time, turned his life around and is now a motivational speaker dedicated to educating as many young people as possible to make a better world for themselves, their children, and their grandchildren. Sammy, please take a couple minutes to share your story with us.
My parents and I were deported to a labor camp in Ukraine by the Romanians. Okay, therefore I belong to two generations, and for 63 years, I knew that I'm a Holocaust survivor, but I just ignored it. Number one, because I have no personal memory of that period of time. And until the Eichmann trial, the Holocaust survivors felt guilty, okay, felt ashamed, felt like victims, and they did not talk. They wanted the children to grow up a normal life. And one of the things that happened last October, for the first time, I really realized that the young Jewish people, okay, the next generation, they have absolutely no clue when it comes to the evolution of the Holocaust, and they don't have a spiritual connection to Israel. One other thing that I also do is I try to teach them to stand up to lies, to words that convey the wrong message, because if we don't stand up, we will perpetuate false narratives.
Thank you very much, Sammy. We're going to get into those issues. I wish we could spend all afternoon talking with you both. And you've raised a couple points, Sammy, but I'm going to hit on these. I'm trying to ask some questions to give a general overview, since there's so much that we could be discussing. While it's quite complicated as to how we got to a place just 75 years out from the end of the Holocaust, in which American Jews seem to be making the same mistake as their European ancestors pre-World War II, I believe there are a number of mindsets that we are repeating. One is assimilation. German Jews were assimilated into the culture and other institutions and felt welcomed enough that they didn't realize until too late what was happening. There's also apathy, which perhaps due to assimilation has led to Jews not caring about Israel, anti-Semitism, and the hate that for most has not yet reached them personally. What do you say to Jews who say it can never happen here, Israel can defend itself, and there are more important things to worry about? And we'll start with you, Irving.
Well, in order to understand that, one needs to understand history. Let me begin with the story. My father was born in the late 19th century, wound up as a lieutenant of the Austro-Hungarian army for 4 years on the Russian front, fighting for the Kaiser, fighting for Austro-Hungary, a decorated soldier. By the time the war is over, my father is a major in the Austrian-Hungarian army. And that was in 1919. In 1944, his son, me, Irving Roth, was put into a cattle cart to Auschwitz to be murdered by his comrades in arms. There was a transformation which took no more than 25 years. And therefore, we need to understand that happened. And once we accept the fact that it happened, then we got to look at it and see if it can happen again. Well, I lived in Czechoslovakia, which is a democracy. I would say it was the best of America. Some people refer to it as Camelot. My father had married, had 2 children. My brother and I was in a business, lived in a community of about 6,500 people. 1/3 was the Jewish population, and lived in a very comfortable life. I went to a public school, fully accepted, particularly because I was a good soccer player. I had friends who were both Jews and non-Jews alike. There was no Jewish community or Jewish part of the community. We lived together, worked together. Jews as partners who were not Jewish. We had teachers who were Jewish and non-Jewish both. So it was a very beautiful situation, much like the best of America. That's where I began my life. And we have to understand that through propaganda, through articles in the newspaper, and eventually government edicts, I wound up in Auschwitz. No one is exempt from this.
I can't stop it.
Sorry.
No problem, Irving. Go ahead, continue, please.
And so when you look at the United States today, you look at the world today, it's not free of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism did not stop the day the war was over, World War II, that is. It didn't. You have Organization A that deny the Holocaust altogether. There are those who call themselves anti-Zionist, and we'll get to that later on. But basically, the words should be understood. It is the hatred of the Jew. It's not a new idea. Over 2,000 years of hatred and persecution of the Jew. It can happen any place, and unfortunately, it has happened in the most cultured society in the world in the 1930s and 1940s. In addition to that, we have something called BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. Israel, the Jewish people, is one. We have to understand that. We are judged as Jews and as Americans, but everybody recognizes us as Jews. And we need to understand, we're judged as Jews, not just Americans. Can it happen here? Absolutely. Can it happen any place? Unfortunately, unless we do something, unless the world recognizes and we tell them how this, quote, anti-Semitism, a euphemism for Jewish hatred, can morph into persecution, and it eventually led to murder of 6 million Jews.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Irving. Your story is amazing, and I found it compelling that you said the transition, you know, it took place in 25 years. And I think that if we look back in the US, we've seen lots of changes within the past 25 years, and who knows what will be coming. So that's an important point, as everything that you said was. Sammy, can you also respond to that question, please?
Yes. For the past 9 months, we are living with a virus, okay, COVID-19. However, there is a much more dangerous virus, and that is anti-Semitism, bullying, bigotry, hatred, and ideology. It cannot be destroyed by guns. Resolutions, okay, we cannot legislate that. People will feel what they feel. The only solution to that, in my personal opinion, is strictly just by education. And if you want, I can talk now, or I can talk a little bit later. But interestingly enough, I found out that the education about genocide and Holocaust is, for practical purposes, almost non-existent. And I'll just give you an example. I was extremely happy to hear that 12 states required genocide and Holocaust curriculum. But when I started to do some investigation and checking out, I realized something very interesting. I spoke to almost 150,000 young people. For the first time last October, I realized that they are totally clueless about the Holocaust. But the interesting part, which really, really surprised me, I met only 2 teachers that teach genocide and Holocaust for a full year. Most of them teach only for a few days, most likely 2 or 3 days. They skim over it, and there are in certain places that they teach it for a whole semester. That is not enough, okay? And we cannot change this world, the next world, the young generation, unless they understand what's happening, unless they understand that this is something, not that it can happen. Unfortunately, it is happening. And we also have to differentiate between anti-Semitism, which is 4,000 years old. It took different forms. Anti-Semitism was based on religion, was based on economic, for different reasons. Today, okay, it's against Israel. Okay, and we have to educate the young people. If we don't educate them, things are not going to change.
Thank you, Sammy. And we will get into that a little bit more in a few minutes. So my next question, when Jews did try to flee their European homes, they had no place to turn. Many tried to get into the US, but couldn't get in. And we know that FDR turned away the MS St. Louis, which was the German ocean liner carrying 900 Jewish refugees who were sent back to their deaths. Think about the number of Jews who would have survived the Shoah had Israel only existed then. Today, the Jewish people have a homeland in which they are all welcome, and yet so many have no connection, or even if they do not prioritize her as an issue of personal concern, which of course goes to assimilation, apathy, and ignorance. In fact, when asked to prioritize their voting issues, Israel is at the bottom of the list for most American Jews. How do we make American Jews realize the importance of Israel, both as the frontline soldier and most important weapon in this war of our people's survival, but also as the most strategic bunker for all of us to find refuge when the forces of evil seek to once again annihilate us? In other words, how do we create more true Zionists, Jews who actively work to ensure Israel's long-term survival and who feel a deep-rooted connection to the Jewish homeland? Irving?
Well, in order to understand that, why the Jewish homeland is so critical, let me go back to the 1930s. In 1939, when we saw what was going on, my parents and grandparents decided we ought to leave Czechoslovakia. In fact, we ought to leave Europe. Perfectly reasonable thing to do. The problem was the gates of the world were not open to us. In fact, Great Britain limited the number of Jews that were allowed to go into Palestine to 15,000 a year. So here you have a group of people, 11 million Jews living in Europe, who must leave, because if they don't leave, they'll be in trouble. We recognize that. And as you pointed out at the beginning, the SS St. Louis was turned away. The world could not, America, with 130 million people living here, could not accept 900 Jews. When a Jew has a problem, where does he turn to? When a Frenchman has a problem, he goes to France. When a Spaniard has a problem, he goes back to Spain. Where does the Jew go? A Jewish state that can accept Jewish people with no restrictions must exist. Are we different than everybody else? Are the rules of the world different to Jews than anybody else? I'll tell you the truth, it is. They are different. I was thinking about the fact that if you think in terms of looking at people, individuals, and countries, you look at a country that pulls itself up by its own bootstraps, that begins with nothing, that begins with sand and rocks and swamps and malaria, and takes that hunk of land, which, by the way, they bought by and large from absentee owners. They drained the swamp to get rid of malaria. They put together a country that is prosperous economically, technologically, intellectually. It should be admired. Israel is not admired. Every other country or any other country in the world would be admired greatly. The Jewish state is not. That is what anti-Semitism, that is what the hatred of Jews is all about. It's a recognition that we are human beings who should have a place to go to, should we be in trouble. Israel must exist. And there is an expression in the Torah when Joseph meets his brothers. Judah stands up for his brothers, and there's an expression called "V'nafsho kashuru b'v'nafsho." The souls of the Father and Son are one. Our souls, our brothers in Israel and us, are one. We are looked upon as one. And so we must understand that Israel needs to exist for us. Not so much maybe for my generation, but in the 90s, but for my great-grandchildren. If they cannot live where they want to live, my great-grandchildren want to live in the middle of Europe, and they can't do that because of anti-Semitism and hatred. They need a place to go. When countries don't care, when governments don't care, when school principals don't care, when presidents of universities don't care about anti-Semitism, unfortunately, we will need a place to go to. That's our Ir HaMiklat. This is the place of refuge.
Thank you, Irving. I couldn't agree more. Sammy?
Sorry about that. Okay. What happens is that I tell the young people, and I try to make the connection between the Holocaust and Israel. During the Holocaust, people died because we did not have a country. Today, okay, we in Yom HaZikaron, we remember the people that died for us to have a country. I'm just going to give one example, and probably everybody knows, and this is France. In France, anti-Semitism, took a, was very big. And as far as I know, somebody can correct me if the number that I'm putting in is incorrect, but I believe that last year, or 2 years ago, about 8,500 people from France went to Israel. They felt unsafe in France. And right now we have a country, and we have to understand that. And the young people, the next generation, must learn and must have some connection, spiritual connection to the state of Israel. The other thing that I want to say is a lot of people believe that the state of Israel was created because of anti-Semitism and because of the Holocaust. That is not true. What happened is the state of Israel was formed because the British Empire collapsed. As a matter of fact, we have to look at it when the state of Israel was formed. Like Greeks are coming from Greece, Italians are coming from Italy, Jews are coming from Judea. We have to remember that when the state of Israel was formed, we returned to our own homeland. And the young people from today, they have to have that spiritual connection to Israel. And unfortunately, there is a lot of apathy in university. I'll just give you an example. I spoke to the president of a Jewish organization at NYU. It was several years ago, and I asked him, do you have any problems over there? And he said, no. And I looked at him and I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, when they demonstrate, there are so many of us that we just ignore it. And this is the wrong approach. We have to stand up when somebody tells a lie, or they are protesting, or they're using anti-Semitic words or other forms of persecution and intimidation. And that is what we have to teach the young people. It's a very big task. And that is my goal in life, to empower them to become active.
I couldn't agree more, Sammy, and you're leading to my next question, which is, one of my biggest concerns is academia. You've both shared with me that in your experience, and Sammy, you just mentioned this, that talking with students, you've discovered that they're seemingly ignorant about the Holocaust. In fact, a recent study reflected that 48% of millennials, now we're not just talking about Jews, we're talking about all millennials and Gen Zers, could not name a concentration camp. 63% did not know how many Jews were killed, while 36% thought that less than 2 million were killed, and 11% thought that the Jews were responsible for the Holocaust. This is scary stuff, and perhaps helps to explain the prevalence of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement on college campuses, and the advent of so many Jewish groups centered on pro-Palestinian causes rather than pro-Israel. In fact, one could argue that the Holocaust began on German campuses, where the Nazis granted student groups that directly targeted Jewish students and faculty, often interrupting lectures and provoking altercations and physically intimidating Jewish students, all tolerated by university administrators, much as we're seeing on our college campuses today. This is a reason why I believe that it is critically important for campuses to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism, or IRA, as we all know it, the definition of anti-Semitism, and that Holocaust education be taught in every school today. Can you both please talk for a few minutes about academia and its role in either leading to a possible repeat of the Shoah or being a force to prevent another one? Irving, would you like to start, please?
Let me begin by quoting a very famous individual, Abraham Lincoln, who said the conversation on the college campus today becomes policy tomorrow. A pretty scary thought. That was, I wish I would have said that for the first time, but it was Abraham Lincoln who said that. So we must understand it. So where are we? Where have we been? The survivors are still there, here, albeit not that many anymore. But at the very beginning, at the post-World War II era, people began to study the Holocaust. And then we have people like a professor of electrical engineering at Northwestern University who wrote a book, The Hoax of the 20th Century, the Holocaust. Another one out in California, the Jews are responsible for all the anti-Semitism that exists because of their behavior, because of their personality. We have to understand that's been around for a long time. And we primarily looked at it and said, it is only a fringe number of people who believe this kind of stuff. There's only the fringe extreme right that's of consequence. But it's not true. It's both the right and the left. Today, both. I unfortunately have to say that the right and the left have met at the extremes. Both hate the Jews. And I think it's important to understand that. And so what do we have? We have indoctrination and not education today.
Exactly.
Facts no longer matter. We have this idea that any professor can teach anything he wants to, and that's appropriate. But the objective of a professor is to give information, debate issues. But when you have a professor, which we do unfortunately by the hundreds, if not thousands today in the American college system, that simply ignore every fact, every historical moment no longer exists. It is their perception. And this is what they teach. And they have the power. They have the power because if you do not answer the question the right way, you don't get an A. You get a C or a D. They have power. And they've used this power. Now, this is one aspect to it. How did they get there? Well, we have to understand in the last decade or so, $1 billion, over $1 billion, was poured into American universities from Jew haters, from countries that want to destroy Jews. This Judaism, Israel, it's all one. Zionism, a Jew without Zionism is not a Jew. For 2,000 years, the Jews have been in exile. And every day, 3 times a day, a Jew turns to Jerusalem and not only remembers it, but once a day, that Jerusalem will be a Jewish place again. That the days of persecution, the days of expulsion are over. This is where we are today. And so, unfortunately, people don't understand why this is essential. Because they live in a peaceful world, a harmonious world. Certainly, I live in a city like Great Neck, New York, and I have a 6-bedroom house with 4 bathrooms, with stores, some are kosher stores even. It seems like the world is at peace. They do not hear what I hear. I was giving a talk at the university out on the West Coast, a well-known one called Berkeley. The middle of my speech, one of the adults jumps up, not the student, one of the faculty jumps up and looks at me and says, "You speak of the Holocaust? How many Arab children did you kill today? How many women did you rape today?" This is what comes out. See, what happened is the writings of these anti-Jews is become slogans. And unfortunately, slogans lead to action. Action led to murder. But the worst part of it, that murder of Jews was patriotism in Germany. And that's the criminal part of it. This is what we must understand, that in a period of from 1933, where the Nazi Party was voted into power in Germany, till 1945, a mere 12 years, the society was transformed. God-fearing, church-going, decent human beings, educated intellectuals, cultured people, became murderers. That transformation we must understand. It was not a bunch of hoodlums, it's not a bunch of uneducated boors. It was in the university that it took place. It was in the street, on the radio, in the newspaper that took place. And today, if you read some of the material that is published by newspapers throughout the world and even in the United States, it almost doesn't matter, but the issue is the Jews are wrong. You know, Sammy mentioned the virus. Now, it's spread in certain areas more than others. They have in New York, they have these yellow zones and orange zones and red zones. And how is it reported? This is a CNN report, which I watched. There are people who believe that limitation to place houses of worship is appropriate, yet others feel it's wrong because it impinges on the First Amendment. And there are both Jews and non-Jews alike who object. There is a group in Brooklyn who took the US government to court of not allowing to have gatherings in their churches. And how was that reported? It was reported by an interview with one of the archbishops of Brooklyn in a very gentle, dignified fashion. And how is the issue that Hasidim have a greater rate of the virus and therefore are in the orange or red zones? Photographs of Jews burning masks, chanting, fires, total havoc. That's the way it was shown with respect to Jews. And the words were, it wasn't a small group of Jews, it was Jewish Hasidim. The operative word is Jewish. It doesn't matter if you wear a sheitel or a long black kaftan, or you wear a shorts with a tennis court. You are a Jew. And you're judged and looked upon as a Jew. You need to understand that. And we must fight it. And in order to do that, we need people to have insight into history. And we'll talk about that later.
Thank you, Irving. Everything that both you and Sammy say is just so insightful, but also very, very moving. Sammy, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, a lot of people believe that I'm a one person. What can I do? And one of the big problems that we are having here in the United States is that people have forgotten how to disagree in a civil way. Like Irving said, everything is done through emotion and based on slogans. But I want to concentrate on in one example, personal example, how one person can make a difference. I was invited to go to Mississippi State University, and I spoke to over 500 people faculty members, this. And to my surprise, I found out that including 3 faculty Jewish members, altogether, there were only 11 Jews. And I asked, how did Hillel start it? In one single student, with the help of the Jewish faculty members and with the help of the administration, they allowed to form Hillel. Today, they have over there, I would say, close to 30. So it's growing in everything else. But I want, when people say that I don't have the power, okay, that is not true. And I use a quote, to the world, you may be one person, but to one person, you are the world. We are interconnected, in each one of us can do, based on their personality, their involvement, their whatever they care, they can make a difference. And I'm going to give another quote. A friend of mine, okay, she was beaten in her building, and she was in the hospital, I think, for about a month and a half or whatever it is, very severe. And the neighbors helped her. Without the help, she probably wouldn't be alive. And she quoted the following, okay? If you are indifferent, okay, if you are indifferent, okay, no, do not be indifferent, because things can be different if you are not indifferent. So it's very interesting. We all have to care. One thing that really, really perplexes me is especially the people that proclaim tolerance are probably the most intolerant people that I have met. And I think we can blame whoever you want to blame, but the media plays a very big role. It's in the academy, but the media is also a guilty and a culprit in perpetuating this sense of hatred, anti-Semitism, of confrontation. Why can't we have a dialogue? A dialogue, when you have a dialogue, you can come to a resolution. I'll give an example. I was at UC Berkeley, and I found out that there is a Christian Lebanese student who really had a large following, and it was absolutely against the state of Israel, vehemently. And I asked him, would you be willing to talk to me? At Berkeley, I wasn't sure, but to my surprise, he said yes. And when I asked him, why do you feel the way you do? I also made sure that visually, facially, I did not give him the opportunity to misconstrue that I'm confrontational. But the way you treat a person, they will treat you the same way. He gave me the same courtesy, and approximately after 45 minutes, we shook hands. And I said, look, you're taking two things and putting them together. If you are against the Israeli government's policy, you have my blessing. But the state of Israel has done nothing to you. Can you separate the two issues? And because we had a dialogue, it was not confrontational. He said yes. And that's what we need between the groups, to have a dialogue. Because when you have a dialogue, you can always find a common ground.
Thank you for that, Sammy. And again, you've offered a lot of good concrete suggestions. I know that some people are probably wondering, what is it that we can do besides education? And I think that dialogue and never accepting the lies is certainly a critically important step. And it takes vigilance, as you point out, on all of our parts to engage and to ensure that the truth is passed along to the next generations, which goes to my next question. And we might have already touched on this, but I recognize that what we're seeing as a result of either a lack of education on the topic or simply outright Jew hatred is a growing amount of Holocaust denial, an especially dangerous form of anti-Semitism. And it exists on both ends of the ideological spectrum among Islamists, Black Lives Matters, in the halls of Congress, and even in our public schools, where the high school principal of the Palm Beach County Spanish River High School pronounced that he could not call the Holocaust a factual historical event. And we all know that anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, and Holocaust denial is pervasive on social media, as Sammy, you just sort of touched on. Are you both concerned that when the last survivor is gone, the historic record will be rewritten to whitewash the horrific and tragic events that taught us that even in the most civilized of places, a genocide of our people is only preventable when we remain vigilant, engaged, and on offense? Irving, would you like to take a stab at that?
Surely. For 2,000 years, Jews have been dispersed out of their land in exile. And for those 2,000 years, you can go through periods of time where Jews were able to live in harmony and peace within the European society. But if you look more carefully, you'll find that every time there is some positive slope, suddenly there is a sudden drop. I think Spain is a wonderful example of that. Jews became part of Spain, that's what we call them sometimes Sephardi Jews, and lived there. They were part of the community. At least they thought so, until Queen Isabella comes along and Jews are expelled. Why? How can you recognize a Jew? Looks the same. You can't say, well, he's darker in color or lighter in color. No, none of that happens. What happens, the Jew becomes a symbol. It's a fiction. It's a fictitious character created by people who hate Jews. That's who I am. After all, I've lived 91 years, and I have beliefs. I write, I speak, yet all that doesn't really matter. Why? Because in the psyche of an Iranian, I'm a Jew. He knows what I stand for. He knows my beliefs. He knows my morality. He knows every single thing about me, that I'm evil. How can that be? Well, that's what was created for 2,000 years. And here I come along as a Jew, as a Jewish state, and I want my own state. How dare I fight back? They've been able to beat me up. The Cossacks would come along the village and plunder it and kill people, and nobody said anything. All of a sudden, you want to have your own state? You want to have your own defense system? How dare you? And it's bought into by everybody, including the newspaper. And as Sammy pointed out, there are points today where every so often you have a flare-up on the Gaza border. They had for a while, they had these Friday rallies in front of the fence. And unfortunately, you have to respond to that because they're trying to break through. They're trying to dig tunnels to come into Israel and murder children. No, you see, that's called defense. The reason they want to do that is kill the Jewish children because they're the enemy, and this is a defense form. But when Israel retaliates, or Israel builds a fence and not allow people to willy-nilly, terrorists coming in, that's overreaction. And the newspaper will say, unfortunately, under those conditions, sometimes civilians get hurt and killed. So the headline will not say that the Gazans fired 150 rockets, tried to hit a number of schools in Israel and murder children. That's not what it says. The headline says, IDF kills 50 Muslim children. So the stage is set. The world doesn't seem to be able to overcome that. The fact that you can, with no care at all, you can go and persecute, lie, make up stories. When I tell someone today that there's something called the Blood Libel, they look at me, what are you talking about? I explained to them that in the 11th or 12th century, in one of the small cities in England, a Christian child was found dead on the side of the river. And obviously, who did it? The Jews. And they made up a wonderful story. The reason they killed that child is to use its blood to bake matzah. It is the most bizarre idea under the sun, because we all know how do matzahs get baked. You take water and flour, and by 18 minutes later, it has to be a baked matzah. If orange juice gets in there, it is no longer appropriate. If salt gets into it, it's not appropriate. Jews are forbidden by the Torah to eat or drink blood. And to make up the story is unbelievable. But that was in the 12th century. But you know something? In the 1990s, there was a set of TV programs. They were produced by one of the nations that hates Jews, looking at the present, how that's taking place. The image is very clear. A Jew, and it's obviously a Jew the way he looks, befriends an Arab child, lures them into a place. They hold them down, they kill them, and the blood splatters into a pail to be used for baking matzah. Not in 1200, not in 1300, in 1990. How many newspapers in the United States covered that issue? 0. That is also part of the hatred of the Jew. We have to understand that. We have to be able to fight that. And these people are criminals. They're propagandists, and they do not report the truth. See, one of the interesting aspects of that is the fact that you will rarely, if ever, have something that is proactive in a sense. Well, there are two ways of committing sins: knowingly and lovingly. And knowingly, what you do is don't talk about things which are facts. The evils are not spoken of. There's a 3 or 4 hour movie produced by Al Jazeera on the fact that the Jews have been persecuting the Muslims for 100 years. They're interlopers, they're stealing the land, all that stuff. And what's interesting, I was reading a book, a history book, which is used as a guide in the high school systems in some of the places on Long Island. And it says the following: in 1948, Israel declared itself a state, and a war broke out. That's not what happened at all. A war didn't break out. 5 Arab armies attacked Israel. But if you listen to the video produced by Al Jazeera, it is the Jews who attacked the 5 Arab armies. I spoke at a school once here in New York, in fact, and happened to have had a Palestinian kid who quoted this. I said, let me ask you a question. Forget what the facts are. Logically, do you think it's possible for a state that was just born, has no economy, has no army, has no air force, they can't even fly planes, would attack 5 countries that have been trained by the British to fight? Does that make sense to you? And son looks at me and says, oh. That is why, as we talk about what to do, that is important. We need to be able to confront lies with facts. Just as a point, another point, I was giving a talk at a university in the Southwest, and then I asked any questions, and the guy jumps up and starts hurling at me these vindictive lies. So, what do? I looked at him with a smile and say, do you feel better now? You got that off your chest? Then why don't we talk about facts? Why don't we talk about facts? Give me facts and we can discuss it. But if you make up stories, if your whole idea is to put together some fictitious lies against me, there's nothing much we can talk about. And that is what we must do.
Thank you, Irving. Sammy, instead of having you answer that question, I'm going to pose my final question to you as I
have to answer it something very.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I was going to give you another question. Go ahead, Sammy.
Well, there was a questions about the neo-Nazis. Okay, and we have to be very careful when we use words. Leaders of our countries, okay, which has very large following, they say, okay, they use the word Nazi. There are no Nazis today. There are today people that believe in the Nazi ideology. So they are neo-Nazis. But I want to give you an example, a personal example about the neo-Nazis. I learned only in the 30s that I was subjected to medical experiments. My father inadvertently told me that because I was always in pain and I will always be in pain. I will die in pain. Okay, just a question, okay, of the intensity and, where it is. Okay, because I was subjected to medical experiments and a German woman saved my life when I was dying of starvation. So what happened is, I've been invited to speak to 735 students to Bayonne, New Jersey for 6-7 years in a row. And in 2015, there was a very nice article. A reporter was there that wrote a very nice article. May 16, I think. 2 days later, the neo-Nazis picked up that article, word by word, okay, and used it against me being a liar, okay, and also that I cannot talk, okay, because the Holocaust never happened. And let me give you an example of the headline. It took me about 2.5 months to realize that they called it 3 times a liar. Jew holohoaxer. Holocaust hoax. It never happens. If it never happened, how can I talk about it? Claims medical experiments he can't remember. It's true, but they don't say why I don't remember, because the doctors did not come to my parents and tell them, this is what we did to your son. They did not know, I don't know. At the same time, okay, still cause them pain, which is also true. You see, they use innuendos without giving, okay, the facts, okay? But the pain that I'm having cannot be really cured because it's head, neck, shoulder, and back. And the intensity changes and it's moving constantly. It's not localized. Okay. To make a long story short, when my father inadvertently told me that I was subjected to medical experiments, he did not help me with the pain. But I have decided, gave me the courage to ask for compensation. Now keep in mind that the Germans did not want to pay unless you had proof. Number one, I do not know what they did to me. Number two, I was homeless, I had no documents. And number three, in February 8, 2002, when I applied for it, okay, everybody was gone. So I just did it for myself to feel good. Guess what? 2 years later, they sent me an answer, but not only an answer, they paid for it. Okay, and the neo-Nazis have never put in, okay, that I was paid by the German government, and that they admitted that they did medical experiments not only in Auschwitz by Joseph Mengele, but they did it also in other countries, and that I was one of them. So it's very, so I'm teaching that, and I use it as an example, and I teach the young people, okay, to do the research, not everything that they hear, not everything that they read, not everything that they see is the gospel truth. There are plenty of good sources to go and, okay, to do the research. So it's the other thing what I want to say, we have leaders that use words, okay? Like for instance, somebody is saying, okay, and this and people from the Congress, they say that there are concentration camps in the South. They say that Holocaust is happening today. And both of them are lies, so they have to stand up, okay? There is a difference between genocide and Holocaust. Genocide is happening. Holocaust is the annihilation of a group, not genocide, like genocide, the murder of a group of the people. And at the same time, there are no concentration camps in this country. I went, okay, to in Illinois, okay, and I saw that they had a Latin group, okay, and they had a very big poster, okay, that the topic was the concentration camps in the South. And I went to the Jewish leaders and I asked them, did you see that poster? And they said, no. It's in front of you. How come you don't see it? How come you don't realize it? And if Joseph Goebbels, the minister of propaganda under Hitler, he said, a lie told long enough becomes truth. And this is if we don't stand up, that's what's happening. And that's why a lot of falsehood is perpetuated. And one final thing that I'm going to say is Jewish people fight for every minority. Wonderful. Congratulations. Where will be the day that we will fight for ourselves? Why don't we have a 1 million march in Washington, D.C. from all over the country? Let's see how many minority groups will join us. Why can't we do that? I don't have an answer. Okay, we are too pathetic. Too apathetic. I don't have an answer. I wish. Yes.
Thank you, Sammy. Both of you, your passions are so prevalent in your answers, and we are winding down the time. But I do have one final question that I think is important. And Sammy, you just sort of touched on it. And again, for those that it's as we're winding down, this is the final question. If you did have questions that you put into the queue, we're going to try to maybe get to them. Perhaps we'll do a follow-on with Irving and Sammy. And this is being recorded, so you'll be able to watch if you have to run off and if you missed the tail end of this. But and Sammy, you just brought this up. You know, I was going to ask, what do you say to Jews who believe it's their responsibility to fight all forms of hate and not just anti-Semitism? For instance, we've got the folks in Florida that are running the Holocaust Memorial Resource and Education Center that that put up an exhibit on George Floyd's death, claiming that their mission at that center is to use the history and lessons of the Holocaust to build just and caring communities free of anti-Semitism and all forms of prejudice and bigotry. And this follows the same reasoning in the House of Representatives last year when they were unable to pass a resolution condemning Ilhan Omar's anti-Semitic statements and had to broaden it to cover Islamophobia and other types of hatred. How do you explain to people that anti-Semitism is a unique form of hate that has to be recognized as such? And again, we are sort of running out of time, so I know that's a tough question to answer in a short period of time, but Irving, if you could try to do so, and we'll let Sammy and maybe include some final thoughts in this as well.
Anti-Semitism is unique. It's been existing for 2,000 years, but it's based on a lie. The hatred of the Jew is based on a lie, a historical lie. The objective of the Holocaust was to destroy the Jewish people, physically annihilate the Jewish people, bring them to a non-existence. Prejudice, on the other hand, let's compare that, for instance, and people often do, to slavery. The objective of slavery is to get free labor. It's an economic issue. And, well, I certainly don't like it. I'm going to fight it, and I want to fight it. It's part of what is very casually called in Jewish parlance, tikkun olam, repairing the world. After all, the Torah itself, 36 times, it repeats the same thing. And it says, do not oppress the stranger. When you have someone who looks different or believes different than you, don't oppress them because of it. It seems like that particular sentence was missing in the Bible, certainly in the Christian Bible. So it's always existed. First, it was based on the fact that the Jews don't believe in Jesus and a whole bunch of stuff of that nature, but it changes depending upon the particular conditions. Because you have a pandemic, you need someone to blame. But a perfect example, blame the Jews. And they do it in a very sneaky sort of a way. And that's a basic problem. That's it. Today, what's happening is that we have people in the world and in the Congress of the United States who want the Jewish people to disappear. What do I mean by that? Well, they've joined something called boycott, divestment, and sanctions. What is the objective of that group? What is its basic premise? From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. What does that mean? Free of what? Free of Jews. That's the point. And these people are now in the Congress of the United States. They've been trying to introduce BDS into the American system, not in general, but specifically to the government. Fortunately, it failed because there are only 5 of them who want to do this. My fear is what happened in Nazi Germany. In 1920, there was an organization, the Nazi organization. It had 7 members. Let's remember, 7 members. In 1932 election, that same country, which had originally 7 members, now 39% of the people voted to bring the Nazi Party into the government of Germany. By the way, they did not hide the fact that they're going to get rid of the Jews. Is in Mein Kampf. There's a whole chapter devoted to just that issue. And that was published in 1925. So that's where we are. And we must understand it's from words, from slogans, action, from action, murder, mass murder, and becomes patriotism. Now, one of the interesting aspects is that we don't quite understand how all this is happening and who is doing what to whom. Because we're familiar with the right wing, so to speak, the Nazis, the David Dukes, that in your face, they tell you. Unfortunately, the extreme left puts this whole idea of Jew hatred in a different form. It's part of something we call human rights. We believe in human rights for everyone except for the Jews. They don't have rights. They're the same. They are National Socialists who believe that the Jews are the enemy. Just as a final comment, a number of years ago, I was giving a seminar at one of the universities. And there was a small class of about 20 people or so. And there was this lovely young Black student. And she came over to me, she said, you know, this whole thing makes no sense to me. Jews are persecuted, but they're the same color as the rest of society. They're whites. So you don't understand. In the eyes of the Jews, we may think they're white. They have certainly economic opportunities and everything else. But you're still part of those people. which is an expression very often used. Why do you people? That's where we are. We must fight it, because if we don't, how will my great-grandchildren live on Long Island? Being persecuted? Being ostracized? After all, in universities and colleges today, the Jewish kids are being hassled, persecuted, and beaten up. Yet the administration says nothing. And I suppose one of the reasons they don't say anything, because the universities in the United States got over $1 billion from people who want to destroy the Jewish people. They're complicit. They are complicit in anti-Semitism, anti-Judaism, hatred, racism, every aspect of it. They are complicit. There's no such thing as a bystander.
Thank you, Irving. Very moving. Sammy, would you care to give us your final answer on that and your final remarks?
Well, I think Irving summarized it pretty well. Okay, well, I can say the same things, possibly in different ways. The only thing that I am saying, I started to speak for the first time only in 2008. Okay, it's a very interesting story. What made me do that? But my mission in life today is to reach as many young people as I can, nationally and internationally. I also want the young people, based on my personal experiences, because I'm also a motivational speaker, to learn under no circumstances should they ever give up, should they ever lose hope. And my motto in life is, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to be. And within my means, I choose to be a happy person. And the positive outlook on life that I always had carried me through it, carried me through, okay, the 9 months that I was being all alone in a house arrest, you know, self-imposed, what can I tell you? Okay, and the only thing that I can say, we are not going to change this world. I'm talking about the next generation, unless they become educated. Education is the key. And we will always face anti-Semitism. It will always take a different form, okay? Always took different forms. We are fighting not only the media, the anti-Semitism, we are fighting ourselves. We are not united. And that is a very big problem, because I'll just give an example and I'll finish with this one. I don't know how many of you remember that in Skokie, okay, the neo-Nazis wanted to march. And at that particular time, I think it was in the early 70s, I think it was probably the largest concentrations of Holocaust survivors there. And I used to live in Milwaukee, and we formed an organization called Coalition of Organization Against Nazism. We did not care what you believe in. We did not care if you're a communist, if you are a fascist. We did not care. Your ideology, nothing. All we care is about one point, and that is stopping the neo-Nazis of Marchik and Skokie. And we succeeded without violence. We succeeded. And that's what we have to do today when we have anti-Semitism, which is a unique form of hatred towards the Jews. Okay? We have to be united in all of the organizations, all the Jews. We should come together, and let's see how many, okay, other minorities will join us in that particular fight. Okay. Again, thank you. I'm very honored to be part of this webinar, and like I said, my goal is, okay, to educate the next generation.
Well, I can't thank you both enough for not only participating in this webinar this afternoon, but for everything that you do. You've both made some critically important points. If I'm taking a look at the Q&A, and I'm sorry we didn't get to those questions, but everybody feels the same way, just impassioned, invigorated by your words. And what I'm hoping is that since this is recorded, that this will be passed around. It isn't just going to end with the people that saw us this afternoon and this hour is over, but no, we're going to post this to our website. We're going to post it on YouTube. We're going to share it with everybody. And your words of wisdom will hopefully go far and wide. It's critically important, as you all pointed out today, that we get your message out. I can't thank you both enough. I wanted to thank, on behalf of AZM's Anti-Semitism, Anti-Zionism and Holocaust Denial project, everybody that joined today. I want to thank the 33 AZM National Zionist member organizations, the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County, and I look forward to working with you both in the future on these very important points and to our upcoming projects. Thank you all and have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Lauri. Okay, you did a
Thank
great
you.
job.